Good afternoon, everybody, or evening, depending on where you are. Thank you for tuning in. Today, I'm joined by Gold and Gunpowder. We're going to be discussing a variety of topics today, pertaining to mostly what he does on his channel, as well as sort of integrate it into, because it has to do with a lot of the topics that we discuss here. But I'm going to give him an opportunity to go ahead and introduce himself. How are you doing, Golden Gunpowder, or G&G?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Do you want to go ahead and tell everybody, like anybody who might not be familiar with your work, a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, well, everyone is familiar with me, of course. So, I cover. I make short historical documentaries concerning the Golden Age of Piracy, which I define somewhere as the period 1630 to 1730 Anno Domini.
Okay. So what got you interested in making or starting up your channel in the first place, or got you interested in these topics to begin with?
Do you want the short version or the lengthy version? Here's like just a warning. Like I can go on.
Let's go with the lengthy one. Let's go with the lengthy one. I'm no stranger to
the lengthy one. No, initially I wanted to look into. When I was younger, I started up the channel, I think, in 2019. I wanted to eventually get into writing, and I thought like the best way to advertise the written works would be to via YouTube, since I saw like a lot of YouTubers, they tend to shield their books and whatever on their YouTube channels, like, whatever. So I figured, I know a bit about pirates, so I might as well do a channel about it and share the knowledge I have, and then eventually when I get some stuff done, I can try to share it, essentially. Now the problem with my early channel is that I only use the general history of the pirates as a source, which is why I've deleted pretty much all of my videos prior to, I think, all of my videos prior to 2021.
That makes sense, because that's when I discovered you, was around then.
Yeah, and I still want to delete a lot of my old videos, but it's largely pertaining to quality issues, I find, but also to I think all of my videos I have uploaded right now. But this is also something to the people that don't know me. A big issue I see on YouTube is that people who cover historical topics, they don't really take their research very seriously. And they mostly use online sources. They use Wikipedia, which is sometimes good, sometimes it's well sourced. But Wikipedia tends to be a summary of things. It tends to be a simplification of things, leaving out a lot of the interesting details, a lot of the important details. And the problem is also when everyone uses the same easily available sources, is that you get a lot of repetition. And I really hate circle jerks. I hate repetition. So I try to provide something that is fresh. I always try to provide a different perspective, something that is new and interesting that you haven't heard before. That is essentially my niche. So, a lot of what I aim with my videos is try to get as many new and interesting details out there. And when I look back at some of my videos, there's a lot of like details missing. The problem also with YouTube is that sadly you can't go back and edit your videos, like you can't replace them. You can re-upload them, but then you're gonna lose views, you're gonna lose track status, and it's gonna be hard to give the video some attention again, which is a bit annoying, and it's kind of anti-intellectual. I think it would be more beneficial if you could go back and change facts and then just leave a public log where you present where the changes you've made are presented.
I think that's like one of the problem, because YouTube is mostly focuses on, I guess, just like more, I guess, popular videos, like entertainment, that sort of thing. They really don't take priority into saying, oh, they really never went into it thinking that when it was created, thinking that there are actually going to be people making serious documentaries on here. And that kind of lack of a robust editing system really does make it difficult. I say that as a history YouTuber myself too, so.
No, I agree. And I don't think there are any, even if you look at like other platforms where they have professional documentaries with a lot of like work put into it, it's always directed towards the intention with publishing a documentary is ultimately to make money. So they don't, if new information comes out, the publishers or the top creators, they don't really care about the details. Maybe the individual historians involved, they care, but they can't do anything about it. One of my I keep in touch with a few historians. They help me on videos. So I've done a few interviews with them on my channel.
I actually almost did an interview with Colin Woodward about a year ago. That did. Okay. I had to cancel that one though.
Okay, what a shame. No, he's pretty big. I'm a bit conflicted about him. His book is very good, but it's also caused some turbulence in the community, both good and bad. I'm trying to get back what I was saying. No, of course. One of the historians I have kept track with, he looks back at some of the books he's written, and he's just noticing errors or missing details and stuff. But he can't really go back and change it, and he has made annotations himself. But you can't go back and change a book. It's not like 1984 where you just pull the book back and change everything and then tell everyone that this was always this way. I wish you could do that. I do tend to admit to having done mistakes. I wish I could change my mistakes, but hey, it's how it is.
Yeah. Well, anyway, yeah, no. So everybody who's watching, not subscribed, I definitely recommend you go subscribe to his channel. He has a lot of great stuff. I will say, so when I was growing up, I guess pirates were kind of my historical niche, to the point where that even got me a nickname in high school. I'm not going to get into that, but I was called the Pirate Kid in high school. It was kind of dumb looking back, but makes sense. But then I discovered your channel. I was like, wow, I'm for once in years, I'm learning things that I'd never heard about. And so that's really why that's how I got into your videos about a year ago, because there were some things you are a breadth of knowledge on that topic. And that got me back into reading about pirates anymore. I reread Woodward's book, and I know we were planning on doing something about a year ago, but that ultimately didn't pan out. But either way, on to the main topic of today. We were discussing mostly the Golden Age of Piracy, which you said you define as about 1630 through, did you say 1730? What was your what was your game?
Yeah, I mean it's also the word pirate is quite complicated.
Yeah. Do you want to go? Do you want to go a little bit into that?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. So there's basically in this discussion there are basically two main relevant terms, and that's pirate and privateer. And people, there was a discussion in the Discord also a few days ago where people said oh, it changed meaning. No, it never changed meaning. A pirate has always been a person who illegally steals, takes stuff at sea, it captures a ship. A privateer is someone who has a legal commission from a government official to take stuff at sea from a certain person. But it can also involve other things like claiming a piece of shipwreck or delivering something to a certain location. It can be whatever. So a privateer is essentially a government contracted mercenary, a government contracted pirate, whereas a pirate is someone who acts on their own volition. The problem is that during this period, and why I narrow in on this period specifically and why I define this period the way it is because during this period there was this cultural and sort of legal gray zone where you couldn't really be sure if someone was a pirate or not. They might be legal or they might be illegal, but do people care? There was a lot of people who benefited from the illegal activity, even just regular people. They could buy luxury products at a cheaper price, a pirate might come in and sell them chocolate and sugar for a much cheaper price, which they normally wouldn't get. High up, you have aristocrats who, they just moved into Jamaica and, they want to start growing sugar. Well, they need slaves, so they have some pirates go out and steal slaves for them. Slaves was one of the most common items, I guess, that they stole. It was very profitable. So yeah, that's why and after this period, the main dilemma of this period and what a lot of the politics concerned is this discussion of where does the limit go, where is it okay? Because people realized these guys, sure, they were that's another thing also. They were also very, when you didn't have organized militaries, they were a really good mode of defense. And sometimes the best defense is a good offense, not necessarily just sitting around and garrisoning the city, but going out and burning and looting the enemy cities. And it also brings money back. Nice.
Think of like Henry Morgan and Francis Drake and those guys.
Yeah, exactly. Henry Morgan is probably the best example because, after Spain and England signed a peace, people realized, hey, we like trading with each other. It's kind of more profitable, but these guys are coming and stealing from our trade partners, and it's kind of not very beneficial to us. So you see in this like 100-year period, you see this slow decline of the gray zone, where it becomes more and more narrowed down to who is doing the right thing and who is doing the wrong thing. And TLDR, in the end, they decide, if you're stealing from people during peacetime, it's not okay. You're going to get hanged no matter what, because you're going to disrupt our trade connections. And if you're doing it at war, it's okay. But throughout this period, you have people who still say, no, it's okay because we're doing it to people we hate. We don't recognize the peace treaty and stuff like that. It's ambiguous. And you also see a lot of these pirates actively calling themselves privateers. They say, even though they are committing a crime, they say, no, we're legitimate. We're not pirates. We're privateers.
Yeah, I even think like Benjamin Hornigold considered himself a patriot even during his like an English patriot during his pirating day or following the Queen Anne's War. I believe it was but they still considered themselves British citizens. They didn't consider themselves, I think they mostly considered themselves enemies of the Hanovers specifically, or at least those who had Jacobite sympathies.
No, Hornigold was definitely a very broad, more of an English patriot in general. I always like to compare. Another thing also is that people usually compare pirates to just criminal groups in general, which I think is a bad comparison, because they were outside of society in a way. They were pariahs in a sort of sense, whereas criminals, as we understand them, are more so parasites and dependent on society, whereas pirates sought to establish their own. And I think they're more so comparable. I think it's better to see them as a sort of paramilitary force, kind of like in one of my recent videos, I compared them to the Freikorps during in Germany after the First World War, during the Revolution. They're also comparable to stuff like the Azov Brigade in Ukraine. Is people who decided to take up their own arms and do kind of what they want, and they exist in this gray zone where people accept them, but in the
United States, we have things sort of like that. Not as big, but called like militia groups or like militia movements, which are generally like a lot of far right people who like arm themselves in the case they need to overthrow the government. So I guess that's kind of comparable too. But
yeah, it is comparable, but of course the matter is still that these ultimately these people wanted to make money, which we don't usually. Paramilitary groups today have a they have political goals. What was the original question?
Oh no, we were talking about you were going on to talk about like outside, or about how there were groups that did not depend on society, but that were outside of society that were trying to build up their own.
Oh, no, I think originally I wanted to just define pirate and privateer and just
that's right.
In this period. Yeah. But yeah, that's basically it.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I always did think that was interesting, especially because you have. I think I've always thought it was necessary to divide, I guess, kind of the different eras of piracy, specifically within the Golden Age, so 1630 through, I don't know, like 1730, that 100 years. About how you have the buccaneering period, which is in which pretty much all of the pirates active then, even though they were seen as pirates by one side, usually the Spanish, they were effectively all privateers. Whereas then you have that point that tiny period between like 1713 and 1721, where it was just a very, 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 I guess, different breed entirely. specifically in and around the Bahamas. And I don't know how much you're going to be able to get into this today, but there were a lot of significant like political motivations for piracy during that day, like ranging from following the Queen Anne's War. Of course, you have the British Empire is just starting up. They want to consolidate themselves, consolidate an actual military instead of, like, as you were saying earlier, they relied on privateers. It was a lot cheaper, but they want to start building up a military force. And then you have them coming down with all these heavy tariffs and taxes on the colonies post Queen Anne's War. And that then also you have like local officials and merchants who want to try to undermine the British Empire's tariffs and engage in free trade with each other. Of course, that automatically gets you branded a smuggler and a criminal, especially if, like, for instance, in British India, if the East India Company, if you were a free merchant, you were basically a smuggler. But just think you had a lot of motive. Then you also have the Jacobites opposing the Hanovers. And so I guess this was all kind of apt for resistance against the British during that period in the Bahamas. And it almost, in a lot of ways, there's a lot of, I'm trying to find the words to say this, but it almost mirrors a lot of the anxieties. Of course, the population was smaller, but the anxiety among the local population almost mirrors that which it was following the 7 Years' War or the American Revolution. What would you have to say about that?
No, I do mostly disagree with the assessment that that was overarching anti-British sentiment. I do think there was more so the biggest cause of the pirates or privateers active in the Bahamas. It was mostly a post-war revanchism going on, because they were primarily directed towards. If you look at the biggest bulk of them, they were primarily directed towards the Spanish and the French. Looking at, but it should also be first explained that there were essentially two groups active in Nassau. Overall on New Providence, of course they had in the Bahamas they had their base on New Providence. They were also active on Harbor Island, where they had and Eleuthera, where they had contacts with the local merchants and stuff. There was a huge smuggling network going on there, where they bought in supplies for the pirates from places like Curacao, for example. But the two groups active there, they collectively call themselves the Flying Gang. But the Flying Gang was essentially split in two groups: the Bahamians and the Jamaicans. And the Bahamians were the people like. It should also be mentioned that the Bahamas has a very long history of piracy. Basically, a summary is that very early on, the Bahamas was settled by the Puritans in the 1630s, I think. And they were always very dependent on pirates for protection and for bringing in money. They were very diligent in collecting shipwreck. They would often, the Bahamas is were very treacherous waters. A lot of ships would go there. A lot of storms and the reefs would wreck ships. So the people there, they would go and collect the wreckage and they would build with it. And they would just live off the cargo and stuff like that. So it's always been a people that have always benefited from robbery from the sea in a lot of different ways. So that's and they also had the Puritans have this democratic tradition. Where they, of course, Oliver Cromwell sought to establish the Commonwealth in England. It's the same with the Puritans in the New World. They sought to establish more democratic societies. So the pirates in Nassau, people say it was a republic. They inherited this Puritan sort of democratic tradition. The Bahamians also had more racial equality. There was a lot more freed slaves. A lot of the local officials were married to black Africans. One of them, I'm trying to think of his name. His name was Thomas Walker. He was an official that opposed the pirates. He was married to a black woman, for example. So that's the first group. It's basically these people who have a long-standing tradition of piracy, shipwrecking, democratic traditions. They're locals. Kind of very humble. They're sort of hillbillies, I guess you could say. The Jamaicans are the exact opposite.
They're the
Jamaica,
aristocrats, right?
they're the aristocrats. Jamaica was conquered by the English in 1655. They became rich on buccaneering. They started building sugar plantations using slavery, and they simultaneously, Jamaica is situated right smack dab in the middle of the Caribbean. It's like so easy to go from Jamaica, go to Spanish colonies, and steal from them. So Jamaica has not only been Britain's cash cow for the entirety of the empire, it has also been a hugely important naval and especially privateering base well after the Golden Age of Piracy. So you have this sort of hybrid aristocracy that part-time work on their plantations, make money from sugar, and they also do a lot of trading, a lot of smuggling with the Spanish. But during wartime, they go balls to the walls. They get aboard their ships and they start to do a little looting. And if you look at religion, these guys are Anglican, so they're not Puritan. They sort of support this sort of Protestant Catholicism hybrid.
Yeah, I'm Anglican myself, so yeah, it's it's a lot, in a lot of ways, a lot closer to Catholicism theologically than to Protestantism.
Yes, they just view the Puritans, of course, are Protestants essentially, and they the Anglicans, they view the Protestants as and the Puritans as dirty scum, and they support the monarchy. They support the Stuarts. The Stuart dynasty was very supportive of the privateers. And yeah, what happened after the war was that these snooty Jamaicans, they were able to start trading. They were able to use their privateering ships for trading and stuff like that. But in 1715, for reasons I will probably get into later, the governor of Jamaica, he hires them to go privateering again. He gives them a commission.
Was that Motorford, I think?
No, not Motorford. Motorford was in the 60s. This was Archibald Hamilton.
Oh, it's not okay. We're later now. Okay.
Yes. So in 1715, and Hamilton was, of course, he was Scottish and he was a Jacobite. And do you want me to get into Jacobitism?
Sure. Go ahead. Absolutely, it's probably important. So.
Yes, it's quite important. So I mentioned before that the Stuart dynasty were hugely supportive of the privateers. Well, the Stuart dynasties were a bit lax on religion. You had these guys that I think it was Charles II. He married a Catholic, and eventually
he supposedly also converted on his deathbed. But there's no no evidence. I don't think there's much evidence, but there is. It's very likely.
It's probably Dutch schizo-posting, to be honest. Anyway, I think it was in 1689. I think when he died, the parliament got really spooked that a Catholic was going to come to the throne. So they decide, we're going to invite a Dutch Protestant to become our king. And there's some family relations there that I had to look up. I don't remember it exactly. But the Dutch come over. They essentially just invade England. It's a bloodless revolution, but it's a revolution nonetheless, where the Dutch is called a stadthalter, but it's a prime minister, I guess you can say. He becomes the king of England. And a lot of people, of course, they're not really happy with a Dutchman coming in, a foreign dynasty, suddenly taking over their throne. And they want to restore the Stuart dynasty because the Stuarts were kind of popular with a lot of people. And these people who want to restore these Stuarts are called Jacobites. Of course, they're kind of not really that big in this time because he's Dutch Billy, as he's called, the Dutch king. He's still married to a Stuart woman, and they kind of become more active again in the I think in 1711 or 1713 when the last Stuart monarch on the English throne, Queen Anne, she dies, and instead of one of her relatives, he's called Charles, I think. He's a Catholic. He's a confirmed Catholic. So Parliament, they just go berserk again. They don't want, Shad Catholic monarch. Someone's got a point there. The Parliament just decides, no, we don't want a Catholic. So they decide to elect a German guy from the province of Hanover.
Who did not speak any English, we need to add also.
He did not speak any English. They decided to make him their monarch. And a lot of people they're happy with this because they think, okay, we're going to become more peaceful. We're going to focus on trade, commerce and stuff like that. And a lot of people are like, no, this is kind of weird. We don't want some weirdo coming to the throne. We don't want Parliament hasn't the right to decide this, And there are some uprisings, particularly in Scotland, violent uprisings, and the uprisings fail, and the Hanovers stay on the throne. And a lot, of course, since of course the Stuarts were so supportive of the privateers, these pirates and privateers in the Caribbean, they are overwhelmingly supportive of the Stuart dynasty. That's basically it. But
okay, so yeah,
I mentioned this.
Oh,
yeah, sorry. Go on.
No. You had something else to say. Continue.
I mentioned this Archibald Hamilton fellow, the governor in Jamaica in 1715. He was Scottish. That's a bit sus, considering how many Scotsmen were Jacobites. A lot of Scotsmen were arrested during this period and deported as indentured servants, which is essentially serfdom.
So a lot of Scots were Jacobites, but for them, was that necessarily even a religious thing? Because I know most of them were Presbyterians also.
Yeah. I don't think it was necessarily Scottish. I know that the Stuart dynasty was originally Scottish, so that might have something to do with it. I'm not entirely invested in it, but Scotsmen definitely were. They were the ones most active during the rebellions.
Okay.
But yeah, Archibald Hamilton, he was a Scotsman and he was a Jacobite. And he was eventually arrested for it. And after he was arrested, the privateers he employed were declared pirates. And this was not entirely unfounded because they had attacked, they'd done the naughty and attacked a few neutral, quote-unquote neutral Spanish ships.
So they didn't have anyone to protect them anymore.
I'm sorry?
I said, so they didn't have anyone to protect them anymore.
No. The thing also is that, of course, they were pirates. They were attacking legal ships during times of peace. The problem was that the Spanish kind of started it, because the Spanish had this very overzealous coast guard that thought as long as you had Spanish coins aboard your ship, you must be a smuggler or a pirate, because how else could you get Spanish coins to your ship? But of course, since the Spanish, they're the biggest empire in the Caribbean and they do trading with everyone, even if it's mostly illegal trade. So of course, pretty much everyone. I mean, Spanish coins became the de facto currency of the Caribbean. Everyone had it. And it doesn't help that these coast guards weren't exactly polite. They were fond of doing quote unquote little trolling. A little torture, a little bit of killing people unnecessarily. In the 1740s, they cut off a guy's ears, and that caused a war.
Or Jenkins
not exactly
that
nice. Yeah, Jenkins' ears. So hiring privateers to deal with them and to protect your shipping wasn't entirely unfounded. And these privateers who turned to piracy often used this as an excuse, like Hornigold used it and the Jamaicans used it. They said, oh yeah, well, these coast guards, they're harassing our merchants, so when we're stealing from them, it's a form of defense.
So with the Jacobites, because let me phrase it like this. So from my reading, and I know from some of your videos, I've noticed you mentioned this too, there are a lot of misconceptions with pirates, pirate captains, especially. But they're about how they're often depicted, I guess, in the media. I mean, for various reasons, but also their backgrounds. A lot of them tended to come actually from very aristocratic backgrounds. Of course, we don't necessarily know what these backgrounds are because they would have changed these names. But do you think that there is a link between that and potentially some Jacobite motivations that these pirates had, specifically between around 1711 and 1719?
No, there were definitely sympathies, and even in the lower classes there were sympathies. You can see, like, even these pirate groups, which consisted mostly of low class sailors, they still held, they would still toast the rebel king's name and stuff like that. They would. So it seems like the most common, the most popular political belief amongst the pirates was that they were Jacobites. It's definitely. You can see evidence in this. Their eyewitnesses describe them as toasting the rebel king, as I said. Also, a lot of they often named their ships after the in honor of the Jacobites. There was this French pirate called Olivier Levasseur. Of course, the French, being enemies of the English, supported the Stuarts, because here's the thing: also during the 1600s, England and France were pretty much never at war, and their pirates cooperated with each other all the time. Like England and France were best buddies during the 1600s when the Stuarts were in power. So the French, they loved the Stuarts, and the Stuart pretender, he was a Catholic, and he sought refuge in France, and stuff like that. So French pirates, they also loved the Stuarts. So this guy Olivier Levasseur, Labu, sometimes called, he named this ship Wyndham Galley, which was in honor of the Duke of Ormond, who was a Jacobite, I think. More famous is the Queen Anne's Revenge, kind of on the nose there, Queen Anne. There's also, of course, Stede Bonnet, who was tomorrow's video will be about him. He was from Barbados, which was overwhelmingly in support of the Jacobites. A lot of his crewmen were Scottish and definitely Jacobites. He named his ship Royal James, also quite on the nose, So yeah, there were definitely a lot of sympathies, at least for the Jacobite cause.
Okay. So yeah, then when did this really start to wait? Did these sympathies with them, like Jacobite sympathies, ever really begin to quell in the New World? Then during this period, after the Golden Age of Piracy came to an end, because I know you had Woodes Rogers, who came around 1717, 1718, new governor of New Providence, or the Bahamas in general, was responsible for stamping a lot of these things out. So did he actually manage to stamp out Jacobite sentiments, or were those all like lingering even up and through the rest of the 1700s in the region?
I think it should be noted that these political beliefs seems to mostly have been a preference. I've recently likened it to the sort of electoral issues and debates going on in the US lately, where people have really been quite emotional over which president has been elected and who's been staying in power, but it hasn't really escalated to violent revolutionary levels. And I think it seems to have been mostly like that, like people had a preference, but did they really want to flat out fight each other over who should be king? If you look at what happened in Nassau, was it, even though these people held Jacobite views, most of them eventually took the king's pardon. All of the Jamaicans, pretty much all of the Jamaicans, took the pardon. Hornigold took the pardon. Of course, Hornigold was never an outspoken Jacobite. He just seemed to have been a patriot, and anti-Spanish. And Hornigold was, of course, very instrumental in safeguarding. After Woodes Rogers came and was installed as a governor and wanted to restore British order, Hornigold was instrumental in preserving that order. Of course, there were some pirates which were outspoken Jacobites that refused the pardon, such as Blackbeard, of course. Charles Vane is probably the most famous. Charles Vane is a bit complicated because we don't exactly know his background.
Are there theories that he may have been a Huguenot, like a Huguenot former indentured servant or something?
There is. He shares a name with Henry Vane the Younger, I think, one of the a revolutionary from the English Commonwealth during the English Civil War. So he might have had some background there. As you say, he might have been Huguenot because the name is French in origin. But ultimately, it's just speculation. General history said that he was just a privateer sailor, so it's hard to tell. We know for certain almost certain that Blackbeard was an aristocrat from Jamaica. There are church records with his name and his family. He owned a plantation on Jamaica. Blackbeard is a bit more complicated because it seems the reason he wanted to stay as a pirate was not out of some revolutionary sentiment, but rather because he was having the time of his life. He was in control. All these all these other pirates who took the pardon, they really wanted to become pirates in the first place. Like Henry Jennings, the Jamaicans, they always considered themselves as privateers, and they still wanted to continue doing that. So when they got the offer to take the pardon and return to the Crown's fold, they were happy to do it.
And then you have Steve. Oh, sorry. Continue.
No, please go on.
No, I was going to say, and then you have Steve Bonnet, who is just having a really, really, really bad midlife crisis.
I will leave that to tomorrow, because okay, I do kind of, as I said before, I do like to give different perspectives on things. And the thing is, as we said, a lot of these pirate captains were aristocrats. So what Bonnet did wasn't really anything out of the ordinary. He became a pirate, sure, but like there were dozens of other aristocrats who became pirates, like Blackbeard. And of course, I think that's why Blackbeard and Bonnet became such good friends, because they had similar backgrounds. And
it's one of the most historically inaccurate videos I've seen, to the point where it kind of bothered me. Like, yeah, it was funny, and I don't think it was really trying to be particularly accurate. But it was that one that Internet Historian did. I don't know if you saw it. It was his Gentleman Pirate video.
Yeah, I saw it a few years ago.
Like, I laughed at it, but at the same time, I was like, okay, yeah, no, like, this was wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong. Like, the one part that bothered me is when it said Blackbeard was illiterate, and it's like, no, I mean, wasn't he just the opposite? that bothered me to like no end. I was like, I don't know why I was freaking out after that, but yeah.
I mean, it's that is meant to be like a funny video. It's
It's entertainment.
I know he has read books. He showed his sources. Of course, some of those sources are a bit. I've read a few of them, and they're still a bit iffy. Ultimately, we have so few actual details about these figures, so it's a lot of assumptions. But a lot of the facts that people get about Stede Bonnet, they come from this book called A General History of the Pirates, which I mentioned before, which is
propaganda.
It's not so much propaganda as much as it's basically the same as these videos on YouTube. It was just it's entertainment. They took information. They wanted to sell. They wanted people to laugh and buy more copies. That's essentially it. So the authors, it was probably written by multiple people. They just made up stuff to make it more entertaining, essentially.
Okay.
So the stuff about Stede Bonnet being depressed or having like a fight with his wife. Yeah, it stems from that book, and it's good reading, but there is no evidence to prove it. It's probably made up. There is actually, here's a bit of a spoiler for the video, but we know that before Stede Bonnet left, he wrote documents where he handed over the authority of his property and estate to his wife and two of his friends. So I think they had some sort of deal going on. I don't think, and this was common with aristocrats. They'd give authority of their property to a family member. Blackbeard gave it to his stepmother, I think. So stuff like that. But yeah, Blackbeard was having the time of his life. He had acquired a pretty neat ship, the Queen Anne's Revenge. It's at this time it was the most powerful pirate ship. Now it wasn't like a huge navy ship. It was still pretty small in comparison to what the navy had. But for a pirate, it could capture pretty much any merchant. Not to mention that he had a lot of smaller ships in a small fleet that could assist him at a moment's notice.
Including one that was Bonnet's, right? I think.
Yeah, one of them was Bonnet's. Initially, he took command over Bonnet's ship before he took the Queen Anne's Revenge. But yeah, Blackbeard was just having the time of his life. He was benefiting actively from being a pirate. It was not like a net loss for him. The other thing is that most of these Jamaicans and most of these pirates in Nassau, they didn't necessarily make their money from pirating, but from shipwreck diving. Because in 1715, there was this huge treasure fleet of Spanish ships that got wrecked in Florida. And people basically just said, hey, it's free real estate, or free gold just lying on the beach. So they just went there. Either they just dived into the waters and picked up the gold themselves, or they stole it from the Spanish divers, Spanish ships that came to collect the gold. But when the gold, of course, it's finite. So when it started running out, they realized we don't really have any ways to make money now. So they resorted to attacking ships. some of them even resorted to attacking English ships when especially desperate, even though some of them didn't even want to. But for Blackbeard, since he had a large fleet, he had a large ship, he was able to do a lot of damage. He was able to make a profit from not just shipwreck diving, but attacking ships in general. Like there's this, sadly I didn't feature this in the documentary on him. I do want to make like a longer documentary on him at some point, like a 1 hour or something. His greatest attack was probably an attempt where he led like a 12 ship fleet, and he wanted to attack Saint-Domingue, which is modern Haiti. News of the pardon reached the fleet, so the fleet just split up. Everyone just got their own way. But and that's kind of the problem with Blackbeard. He had a lot of potential, but he was kind of just unlucky. But I think like if he would have had less assets, and if it wouldn't have been profitable to accept the pardon and stop being a pirate, he would have done it. Now, what happened to Blackbeard was that Vane, of course, who was attempting some sort of Jacobite revolution in Nassau, he asked Blackbeard, "Hey, do you want to come and help me out?" And Blackbeard said no, because he was, at that time, Blackbeard had lost his ship, but he was still in possession of a lot of slaves, 60 slaves, and he was essentially trying to slowly sell them off. You could say he was downsizing. He was trying to liquidate his assets. Yeah.
So yeah, what about somebody like we get Bartholomew Roberts, who, of course, the most, in terms of records, most successful pirate, supposedly.
Yes.
How much of a link was there between him and the I guess sort of the Jacobite movement going on at the time, or is that a completely different context? Because I know he was originally he became a pirate after serving as a navigator aboard a British ship, a slave ship, off the coast of Africa, and then after he became quartermaster, first mate, or something, and then his captain died, and they elected him a few weeks later. Was there any link whatsoever to, I guess, what was going on in the Bahamas with Roberts?
Yes, all of these pirates had connections with each other, and like the Nassau pirates at core, they kind of became the fathers of the pirates that would come later. Roberts' pirate captain, Howell Davis, he initially came out of Nassau. I think he belonged to. I think he was actually originally a crewman under Woodes Rogers. A lot of them essentially rebelled against Rogers and decided to go to sea, and they took with them a lot of the old Nassau crew. So they carried along, they took on a lot of their traditions, like the usage of the black flag, for example, which the flying gang seems to have invented, or at least popularized. And we know also that a lot of these later pirates were Jacobites, like Levasseur, for example, who I mentioned. Also, Richard Taylor was one of them. As for Howell Davis's company and Roberts, there doesn't seem to be I don't think there were any Jacobite sympathies amongst them. But aside from that, traditions, definitely.
So I know that one of your biggest things, especially in your videos, is the importance of historical accuracy, and you are quite a bit of the time, at least in some of your older videos, were dispelling a lot of myths that, for instance, are perpetuated maybe in media, that sort of thing. Which of these do you think are, of these myths, which ones of them bother you the most, and why?
Slavery.
Okay.
I'm going to speak about this next month when I'm doing my video series on slavery and related topics. I essentially hate all pirate media, like all the movies, all the video games. I hate all of it because it's romanticized flowery garbage. I get genuinely mad because I think the actual history is so interesting, and it's it's just been hijacked. It's just been incredibly simplified to this, sort of comedic level where pirates are sort of viewed as like comic relief. Whereas the truth is that these people were, it's really one of the darkest chapters in colonial history, and it's such an important part of colonial history because they really formed the start of this of the colonial economy. They were so vital to the early colonial economies and to the early history of the British Empire. In many ways, pirates were the ones who established the British Empire, and slavery was at the core of this. And the slavery was fundamental to piracy. Not only was slaves one of the most profitable cargoes to steal and sell to people, but you could also keep slaves aboard your ship to do shipboard work. And some people say that, like, oh yeah, pirates liberated slaves. Most accounts even written by pirates openly say that Africans were just kept to do drudgery aboard a ship. They were just kept as slaves. Sometimes they were liberated under the right circumstances. It is a very complicated topic, but for the question which myth annoys me the most, it's that this factor is just overlooked all the time. If you look at the most influential recent pieces on pirate media, that would be Black Sails, the TV series, Black Flag.
What's crazy is I feel like I had more problems with Black Sails than most people do. Like I've looked up, I Googled Black Sails historical inaccuracies, and then I see like all these people. And don't get me wrong, I quite enjoyed the first season, at least back when I watched it. Never finished the show, but I feel like they're like the media was hailing it as like the most accurate like piece of pirate media ever. It's like, comparatively speaking, I guess, but like at the same time, it's all the leather clothing, the boots, the ships that have more than the ships that have 2 to 3 masts. It was like Charles Vane's Ranger was like 3 masts. It's like, no, why does it look bigger than the Queen Anne's? It's just like stuff like that, and I just it went in a direction it completely. It felt like it also didn't even try to remain historically accurate, even to like the accounts of stuff that actually happened with these people, to the point where I feel like they might as well have just made up different characters. It would have probably been better.
No, I think they should have either gone a fully fictional route or doubling down on the history more. It felt the series felt a bit confused, but yeah, ultimately, it's the myth that annoys me the most is just how much slavery is overlooked, or either that it's romanticized with people saying, "Oh yeah, pirates liberated slaves," which is not something they actively did. They
because back then that would be the same thing as just like throwing money away.
Yeah, it's
because they were
one of the
more or less.
There is this pirate ship which we have. There were like, well, it was a buccaneer ship called the Blessed Trinity in the 70s and 1670s and 1680s. A lot of the crewmen, we have like I think 5 or 6 different accounts and journals written by the actual crewmen about their adventures aboard the ship. So we know a lot about the inner workings aboard the ship. So it's a great mirror into the attitudes which these people held towards race. And they were free men, freed Indians. They were also Indian slaves, but they had free Indians aboard the ship. Usually tribes that fought against the Spanish, like the Mosquitoes. They had free blacks even. The commander owned the slave. He freed the slave and then inducted that slave into the crew. And he died during one of their battles. We don't know his name, sadly. But they, aside from these free men, they also had slaves that spoke Spanish, that spoke English, that were black, that were Indian. Some of them performed, as they said, drudgery. So, they manned the pumps, did the cleaning. When they were marching on land, because the buccaneers were partly land soldiers, they carried their backpacks. There was even a shoemaker that they had aboard as a slave. And he was later liberated for being loyal to them. They also, there was this tendency for people of the time to use little slave boys as as gifts. So Bartholomew Sharp, the captain, he was gifted a slave boy by the crew at the end of the journey, stuff like that. So it kind of, usually today we want to paint up people as either being racist slavers or liberal, not racist slave liberators, whereas most people during this time were somewhere really weirdly in between, where it's like they can trade in slaves, but they can also liberate certain slaves and become friends with them. It's an attitude which is confusing to us today.
It's funny, like, because it's like even the most staunchest of liberals back then owned slave. Like, we think of the founding fathers, for example, in the case of the United States.
And if you also look at like a lot of the emancipators, so people that were against slavery, they might still be racist. In these attitudes are like, it's quite confusing, and I think it's why most media avoids it.
It's like Lincoln wanted to Lincoln and Jefferson, they wanted to repatriate them to Africa. So it just goes to show, and how that's like the white nationalist position now in the United States. It's repatriation. So it was like that funny. It was like that joke. It was I forget who it was. I think it was Michael Malice. It was conservatism is just progressivism driving the speed limit.
Oh, no, but as for myths, it's definitely that how much slavery is underplayed, because slavery and piracy, they're basically intrinsical. They're basically one.
So what pieces of media would you say, like pirate themed media, even if you absolutely hate, which ones at least are able to keep your attention? Which ones don't piss you off to the point where they are unwatchable?
My favorite pirate movie is the Treasure Island adaptation from 1990.
With
Christian Bale.
Christian Bale and Charlton Heston.
Yes,
that's a great one.
So a young Patrick Bateman before he became the Sigma male. This is his origin story. No, it's a really good movie. It's the music in it is great. The cinematography is good. The combat scenes are really good.
Such an underrated one.
Yeah, and I think also that the book Treasure Island, it's a bit ironic because it's really well researched, and it is accurate as well, but it has also some stuff that was made up as literary devices, which people who later read the book, they thought that this is how pirates are done. So most of the stuff we have about pirates in media is just entirely based on Treasure Island. It's not based off the history. It's based off an interpretation of history. I'm trying to think up some sort of comparison. I do think that what pirate media needs is we haven't really gotten the anti-pirate yet. If you look at like cowboy movies and gangster movies, they all have an anti-genre that just that just broke up the romantic view of it. For the Western, you have the spaghetti westerns made by Sergio Leone, the Dollars trilogy, where the cowboys, they're certainly portrayed as very as a sort of greedy and less honorable people, and especially the movie Once Upon a Time in the West, where the West is portrayed as there's an economic incentive. There's like a conflict over land, people who kill each other to get land to build a railway. And the gangster movie, of course, you had romantic movies like The Godfather, where it's portrayed as like, the mafia has so much honor, they operate under ideals. And then Sergio Leone comes again in, I think, 1984 and makes Once Upon a Time in America, where the main character, he's a rapist.
Yeah.
And they kill people for fun, and it's just the mob is just portrayed as honorless and just really disgusting people, which seems more inclined to how it was in reality.
And then you got Scorsese, who comes in after that too, with Goodfellas and Casino, and
now we have Sopranos, and and the westerns, of course. Pretty much all Western movies are incredibly dark. You got Django Unchained. I like the original more. There's also
Hateful Eight.
Yeah, Clint Eastwood was in some cowboy movie where I think he produced it himself, and he's the main character. and he rapes someone within the first 20 minutes. I know it's
deconstructing himself. Then
it's interesting at least, but pirate
we
movies
even
really
have that
haven't
with
gone.
superheroes now too, because we've been oversaturated with superhero movies since the early 2000s, and you started to see that especially with like Garth Ennis, with his with both like Preacher and The Boys, and of course that's a television show now. But I feel like that is like the genre that is currently being deconstructed now. But yeah. But you're saying about the pirates.
No, it's pirate media hasn't gotten like an anti-pirate yet, somewhere where it's really this just very gruesome and dark reality is portrayed. We're still living in this idea where pirates are, they're swashbuckling heroes. They're doing at least, sure, they might be a bit dirty sometimes, like black sails. They're still a bit dirty, but we don't see them we don't really see them for what they really were. And it's also another thing is like pirates are also in black sails, for example, they're portrayed as being quite adept fighters, which at this point in the 1715, the pirates were, they were essentially armed robbers. They weren't experienced fighters. They were used to, making a merchant ship surrender just by hoisting a flag. They weren't exactly good at fighting, and when they encountered trained armed professional forces, they got their asses kicked. So I think like if you wanted to make like a pirate movie set in this era, it would mostly be these kind of young, confused, and angry young men who they like to flex a lot. They're probably quite cocky from drinking, and they do quite a lot of bad things, like slavery and stuff. But they like to flex. But ultimately, when it comes down to the grit, they can't really do much.
Yeah, they just need that. They just need to clean their room, right?
Yeah, I guess you could say. And no, but I think and there have been some efforts in the literary scene to write sort of anti-pirates. I know one of the authors personally. His book isn't really that successful, sadly.
That's unfortunate.
And there's probably way more but books aren't really that. The pirate literary scene isn't as big as it was like 100 years ago, for example.
Yeah, and I know like you had like Raphael Sabatini, who you're not a huge fan of, but I mean he was among one of the most prolific in terms of like the early swashbuckler novels and stuff. So.
I do think somewhere that the future of pirates does lie in the hands of video games. Okay. And people also tell me that like, oh, you can't make a historically accurate game fun, but there wouldn't be so much that you had to do. There isn't so much you have to do. You don't really have to sacrifice fun mechanics for the sake of historical accuracy.
I mean, I don't know. I think two examples. One would be, I guess they sort of did this. This was a few years ago, not Pirates, of course, but Kingdom Come Deliverance, which was a very marketed as like a hardcore, historically accurate game, to the point where it was like annoyingly historically accurate to the sense, like it was very grounded, or at least as grounded as a game could be, set in medieval Bohemia in the 15th century. So I feel like that might be something if somebody wanted to make a pirate game to kind of model off of. But then there was also this game, this RPG that came out in 2003. It was originally developed under the title of Sea Dogs 2, but Disney ended up paying this Russian company that was making it just to call it Pirates of the Caribbean and put the logo on it, because they were too lazy to make their own Pirates of the Caribbean game. But what happened is, over the course of then about the past like 20 years since then, there's been a team of modders that have expanded it by like 95%. So the original game is only like 5% of what it is now. But the entire point was to like make it more historically accurate, like add more historical ships, make it so that I guess the sailing time is more accurate. Like you can speed it up and slow it down. But I do think it's very, very obscure, but I think it is probably the most historically accurate media project regarding pirates that has probably ever been released.
Mm.
And Crusader
No,
has a. Oh, sorry.
No, go on.
No. You're saying something.
No, it wasn't anything important.
Okay. No. Oh, so Crusader asks you, what are your thoughts on Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag?
No, it's. I can't think of anything that is correct in that game.
I hated how they did how they did Bartholomew Roberts. That was probably
the thing is like the characters are wrong. The timeline and what happens in the story is wrong. The clothes are wrong. You wear a. I don't think that the producers of the game have been in the Caribbean. You would not wear several layers of cloth that way in that hot climate. The ships are entirely wrong. The fighting is wrong.
They keep using the terms galleon and man of war interchangeably, and they overemphasize the role that schooners played during that period. It was like yeah.
No, I mean most of the pirates, they operated out of sloops, which were essentially the size of they're essentially the gunboats in that game. And even Hornigold and his gang, they started out in piraguas, as they're called, which are these essentially large canoes with masts. So no, it's and just cannons weren't that popular as we're led to believe. For one, pirates used these very small types of cannons that weren't really able to damage another ship. They were primarily meant for damaging enemy crew and destroying the rigging. So by destroying the rigging, you can slow the ship down so you can catch up and capture it. They're the most favorite weapon used by pirates throughout the entire period, the entire 100-year period, and I mean throughout the entire Age of Sail, was muskets. So handheld firearms. 4 muskets compared to 1 cannon are much cheaper, and they can potentially do a lot more damage. You can snipe individual crewmen like the helmsman, and there are even accounts of massed musket fire just taking down rigging. They just shoot down the ropes, they shoot down the sails, and then the ship is crippled. So muskets, and pirate crews were huge. They were way larger than merchants. They really relied on overpowering their enemies. So you have all of these guys armed with muskets and an assortment of firearms. They can do a lot of damage. And I think that it's a shame because I don't think that people say but I like the romanticized pirates, but it's the only thing we ever see. We only see the same stuff repeated over and over. And like I said at the start of the interview, I hate repetition. I want to I want to see more nuanced things that are different. So if we'd only ever see historically accurate piracy, it would be interesting to see some more romanticized and fancy stuff. But now we only have romantic history, romanticized fantasy. So the historical stuff is essentially non-existent. Anyway, I do think that having these just massed muskets and small ships, I think you could make some really amazing visuals out of it. And it's a shame that it's never explored.
Do you think that it's because the people who make these games, movies, TV shows, what have you, do you think it's because they they purposefully want to depict it in a different way, like traditionally with the cannonballs flying and more, I guess, dramatically and bombastically? Or do you think maybe it's just they're not aware of how it actually was and didn't purposefully do enough research into it? Because if they would have, maybe they'd see, hey, doing things this way would actually be way more cool. What do you think it is?
I almost know for certain that they're lazy, because I have spoken to the historical consultant on Black Sails, and he said they just want to reuse old props. There is stuff that already exists. They have the leather boots from other sets. They have the weaponry. They have the effects. So why not reuse it? It's what people are familiar with. People can instantly recognize the silhouette of a pirate with the boots and the tricorn and stuff. It's not correct. A pirate never looked like that, but it's what people recognize. So it's what they can get into more easily. You don't have to watch the entire series or an entire movie to get an idea of what's going on. You can tune in at any point. And get what you want from it and then go. So it's laziness, and the problem is with media is that, and I guess it's a lot of things in economics. You have this very early period where you explore, you try out new things, and you saw this in the movie industry where like early movies were quite revolutionary. They tried out new things all the time. They tried pushing the limits, and you saw it with video games. Like early video games were so mechanically complex. You had it's amazing, sometimes when I go back to games from like the early 2000s, how much more in depth they are than newer games, because they wanted to try out the technology. They wanted to try out what was possible. And then over time, you find out what is possible. You find out what people enjoy. You find out what sells, what makes money. And you're going to repeat that because it's safe, because, you don't want to go hungry. You need to make money. It's what companies do.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, capitalism ultimately favors, in these creative efforts, it ultimately favors what is safe, which is a shame, because it would be fun to see more experimentality and see more different things, but it's not the safe option.
I see that especially with like things like I don't know if you were ever like a Star Wars fan or anything, but you see that with like the latest Star Wars trilogy too. I mean, yeah, like you had the second one which tried to take risks, but for the most part, it's all been a bunch of just generic slop. And especially because it isn't owned by a major corporation. You see this with like superhero movies, how safe everything is. Just a lot of media in general. And I do think it is, and I say this as somebody who is most certainly a capitalist, that is one of its biggest failings. It only incentivizes what I guess what the masses want, or what the masses are used to, or what the masses can understand.
No, I would agree. I think it's definitely capitalism has. I don't think it has had a positive effect on culture. I mean, I don't really have any sort of deep economic opinions. It's just an observation I'm making. Media and culture. It's something which I am quite an aesthetic person myself, so it's something I ponder and consider quite a lot. Which might be obvious by the lengthy rants I go on it, so it's just an observation I'll be able to make.
So so we have a few more minutes left. Let's talk a little bit about some of your other content. Because I know you're also into like Norse history, because I believe you said you're from Norway or Denmark.
No, I'm from Sweden. Sorry, okay. It's probably like it's like all this. I know you guys just call us Europeans all the time, but it's funny to me, because yeah.
I mean, at least I'm able to identify Scandinavia from Britain.
Yeah, so. No, I'm from Sweden.
Sweden. Okay.
No, it's
yeah. So do you want to talk about what got you interested in sort of Norse history, and why you think it's I guess it is so important to that's not the best way to put it, or just what got you interested in that, and what just made you decide to want to expand your content outward to talk about things like Vikings?
So my second channel, Baltic Empire, it covers more. Well, it's called Baltic Empire, so it covers more history. I mean, in general, it's kind of meant to cover whatever I really want. So I do have, for example, I do have a video which is about the galleys in the Mediterranean. I have a video about like the how Christianity turned more militant during the Middle Ages, and stuff like that. It's kind of just where I cover broader history in general, but a lot of it has turned out to be Scandinavian history. A lot of it has turned out to be Viking history, and it's simply because I read a lot of that history. It's basically that. And as I explained at the beginning of the stream, my niche is kind of taking stuff which is hard to access for most people and make it more accessible, making it in a more viewable format. So especially, when you have very, very obscure Swedish sources, which probably most of my viewers are Americans, even on that channel, they're not able to access. They can't go to the Swedish library and find these books. They can't they can't read Swedish.
And last time I checked, I don't know how to read Swedish. So
yes. So yeah, it's a way for me to make this this sort of history more accessible to people, essentially. And I know a lot of people, they like Vikings. A lot of people are interested in the Gustavus Adolphus, the 30 Years' War and stuff like that. So, and I still experiment with the channel, try out different things. I will, as I say, I cover pretty much just any history I want. So I will, in the future, I do intend to cover the English Civil War on that channel. I will go into also the more, at some point I do want to cover the more, piracy in the 1500s, the sort of progenitors of the Caribbean pirates, which were way more religiously motivated. I see one of my Patreon supporters made a comment here. Hello, Jed.
Oh, this Jed? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a very good assessment. That's why I like your videos too. So, but so I guess I just have one more question to ask. Kind of, I guess, a little fun one, but because you don't read about many of them, but what was the Swedish presence like in the Caribbean during the Golden Age of Piracy, and were there any at least notable or semi-notable Swedish pirate captains?
The problem with Sweden during this time that it was there was a lot of state control in Sweden, so it was illegal for Swedes to move abroad. This is why you didn't see any large-scale migration of Swedes to other countries.
What was the link between that and the 30 Years' War? Was that?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was connected to that. It's because like Sweden nowadays doesn't have a large population. It's like 10 million, I think. During this period, it was like 1 million. And with a country that wants to become an empire and wants to conquer the world, you need everything. You need everything you can have. So the government was very, very effective at taking every resource it had and amassing it. So it was a poor country, but they were able to do the best with what they had and really punch far above their weight. But this meant that a lot of individual rights had to be severely restricted. So, for example, people weren't allowed to move abroad. There were some colonial efforts, like there was this area in, I think, around New York called New Sweden, which was settled. Sweden also had colonial factories in West Africa, so they partook in the slave trade. And I recently read actually one of the English slave ships, I think around 1740, had 4 Swedes aboard. And that's the thing about sailors. Sailors were a really diverse bunch, and they could be. They often shifted from different ships. Sometimes they got forced aboard different ships when the ship got captured. There was this English sailor, for example, who he sometimes willingly, sometimes got forced. He served aboard the Spanish ship. He even served aboard a Turkish ship and fought against his own countrymen and other Christians. So sailors, they were a diverse bunch. You could have Swedes aboard an English slave ship, for example. There is at least one Swedish pirate. His name was Peter Hoff. So Peter Hoff, and I think that's how you Americans would say it. And he was a cartographer, and he had a lot of knowledge about the Caribbean. He knew the waters very expertly. And for this reason, he was kidnapped by Samuel Bellamy, Black Sam, who wanted to employ his skills. And Peter, he tried to escape at one point. He got whipped for it. And in the end, despite him being forced aboard Bellamy's ship, it didn't help him out. It didn't help him in court. So he was hanged for piracy. Very unfortunate.
So yeah, thank you so much for coming on, Golden Gunpowder. I don't know if I should use your real name here, not because I know it, but G&G, I guess, best way to say it. I know this has been a long time coming. We planned on doing this probably about a year and a half ago originally, but it just fell through a few times.
It's the pair of lazy fucks,
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, thanks for coming on. I'd love to talk to you again sometime.
Sure.
I just want to let anyone in my audience know, please go support him. Go check out his channel, subscribe. He makes some really great content. For those of you who aren't subscribed to me, I'd ask you come do the same as well. But on that note, I wish you and the audience a happy weekend.
Yeah. Good night.